Hi there. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to wait about 10 more seconds for more people to join. Welcome, welcome. Okay, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another Sankofa event. Tonight, we are hosting a discussion of white space, Black hood, opportunity hoarding, and segregation in the age of inequality, which shows how the American government created ghettos and affluent white space and entrenched the system of American residential caste that is the linchpin of the U.S. inequality and issues a call for abolition. We're so honored to be joined by the author, professor of law, Sheryll Cashin, and writer and radio host, David Whettstone. Their conversation has been pre-recorded, but they will be joining us for the last 15 minutes of the event for a Q&A. So please engage in the comments throughout their discussion because we'll bring your comments up later for them to answer, or your questions for them to answer and your comments to respond to. And also, don't be alarmed when their clothes and backgrounds have suddenly changed because this is recorded on a different date. And before they begin, please allow me to give you a brief bio. Sheryll Cashin is an acclaimed author whose books have been nominated for the NAACP Image Award for Nonfiction, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Nonfiction, and an editor's choice in the New York Times Book Review. Cashin is the Carmack Waterhouse Professor of Law, Civil Rights and Social Justice at Georgetown University, and an active member of the Poverty and Race Research Action Council. David Whettstone is a public policy advocate and writer with decades of national and local experience regarding such issues as civil rights and criminal justice. Presently, he serves as the host and producer of the We the People radio show on WPFW. Without further ado, let's hear from our guest about White Space Black Hood, which can be purchased at www.sankofa.com, or you can come by our brick and mortar store on Georgia Avenue in DC. Thank you.
And welcome, viewers. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. And Ms. Cashin, welcome.
Hi,
Um,
David. So nice to be with you again.
Thank you. From this point forward, if you allow me a little bit of informality, I'll be using Sheryl, but I wanted to always show respect. And it's a good occasion that your book has appeared. I'm very grateful as a reader for it. We average Americans, black, white, and people of color, often don't walk around with carrying such a history. And in one regard, you reveal the load of our history, but you also lighten the load in being purposeful for justice. And that's what we're going to explore tonight. I want to acknowledge to the audience that our lives overlap. As you heard in our introductions, we engage matters of law. More formally, our professor of law here. Informally, I've been an advocate both in local and national situations. I did some time on Capitol Hill, mostly as an educator. That's the way I advocate. And so we're going to deal with matters of law, matters of history, and other matters of society as we find out why our society is the way it is. And the other overlap I want to acknowledge is that I had the pleasure of knowing Miss Cashin as a writer because we both are involved with the Hurston Wright Foundation, which is a foundation that supports Black writers. So we'll be talking about that, I'm sure, periodically throughout the interview.
Mhm.
Um, let's start out with I understand you took about 20 years of research and dedication to this book, and I have the privilege of reading, I believe, I'm going to miscount here, but four or possibly five other books, which we'll name throughout the interview. You dedicate yourself to communicating with the public, with your students. You're somebody who's actively engaged in the community. How did you begin this particular journey? How did you start your writer's journey, and how does it apply to the particular project of White Space Black Hood?
Well, I was born into activism, literally. I come from a civil rights family in Alabama, David. First of all, it's so wonderful to be with you and
Thank
the
you.
Sankofa audience. Sankofa Books is legendary, and I'm just thrilled to be doing anything with Sankofa. Just wish we were in person, but that will happen, God willing. So anyway, I was born into a civil rights family. My mother literally took me to a sit-in with me in her arms, got herself arrested with me in her arms at 4 months old. And it goes from there. I tell that story in my memoir, The Agitator's Daughter. But our family value was that you are required to advocate for Black people, particularly Black people who have less than you do, right? And for some reason, I've always been obsessed with neighborhoods and development patterns and who lives where and why, and who gets what and why. And I worked in the Clinton White House, um, and when I left there in '96 and started law teaching, all of my academic work was about residential segregation, school segregation. I clerked for Thurgood Marshall in his last active year. So I write about my obsessions, and writing is my advocacy. Um, and so that's where it comes from.
And with those engagements, with your many books, you are not only telling a story of history, but you're trying to get us to think, analyze, and be empowered to act.
Hmm.
And I think one of the takeaways is there's an energizing in your book, a new way of thinking that's not particularly weird or out of out of sorts, but it really engages our day-to-day lives, and it's about structures, place, but more importantly, it's about people.
Mm-hmm.
And so in your narrative in this latest book, both place and persons are going to be critically important to the reader. And you start out with kind of an iceberg of quotes to show that there's a great momentum in our history, a great momentum that structures our everyday life. Um, why is it that you started out with notable quotes basically by white male leaders who guided this nation or misguided this nation, depending upon your point of view, for quite some time? What was the point of that introduction?
Yeah, so I have a prologue that runs maybe 2 pages or more, goes straight through from Thomas Jefferson to Donald Trump. Yeah, you're right. Every single one of them, white men, a lot of them presidents or presidential aspirants, but also just ordinary white men. In the prologue is stories they told themselves
Sure.
and a nation,
Yeah,
right?
sheriffs, mayors,
Right,
senators,
right,
congressional representatives.
right.
Yeah.
And every single quote is one of anti-blackness, of stereotypes about black people. And I just show in this prologue that each time this country seemed to have put to bed a peculiar black subordinating institution, it created another one. And then the rhetoric around it to justify it and conscript everyone into supporting that institution changed, right? But the anti-black rhetoric is what's propelled and been central to white supremacist institutions, right? From slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration and the iconic black ghetto, right? The and from the 20th century on, the defining experience for Black American descendants of the enslaved has been segregation. And I really drive that home in the book. So we're dealing with the third or the fourth peculiar anti-Black institution, residential caste. You cannot understand why it is that Black Americans in so many dimensions experience inequality without understanding the centrality of geography. And it's an intentional institution. We overinvest and exclude in affluent white space, and we disinvest, contain, and frankly, prey on people in high poverty Black neighborhoods. And we tell stories about the people in the hood to justify the way things are.
It's an overwhelming case to have an American city or town that is allegedly thriving to have a low income, high poverty, disenfranchised area, in this case, known as ghettos in our last decades of history.
Mm-hmm.
And again, let me reiterate, in order to have a functional American town, it's almost a requirement, a must by the powers that be, that there must be a disenfranchised group of people, um, in this case, mostly black and brown, in order for these cities to, I won't say thrive, but continue their existence.
Well, my argument is that this is what the title, white space, black hood. I'm really underscoring is you could not have one without the other, right? You couldn't have poverty-free, predominantly white areas that have the best of everything, without out concentrating poverty elsewhere and excluding people who were viewed as undesirable, right? And it's worse than people realize, I think. Well, it's worse than I realize, right? And that's why I wrote about it, right? It's like, damn, I've been studying this stuff for 20 years, and the more data I got, and I finally got it, like, this is intentional. we are intentionally holding people down, right?
It's
It's a caste system, right? It is designed for failure on the part of people who are trapped in high poverty neighborhoods, what we call the hood, a term of affection, right? Which I'll use from now on, right? Rather than ghetto. And um, and yet we also construct the opposite, affluent white space, which is designed for people to rise. And right now in American society, the only people who are truly winning, living the so-called American dream, are those who can afford to buy their way into high opportunity places. Everybody else who's excluded from there is subsidizing their golden infrastructure. Everybody else is harmed, but the people in the hood are harmed the most, right? They are othered by everybody, right? And the stereotypes that drive residential segregation are really the stereotypes of the hood, right? And some of our own people participate in this, right? So I shine a light on all of it.
to help the potential reader, and I think we're going to make a convincing case in our time together. Uh, you really grasp the expanse of history for us in a moment. I
Mhm.
mean, there are allusions even to pre 19th century, even though that's your major starting point. Um, there's a sense of acknowledgement. You know, indigenous people were wiped out, genocide.
Mhm.
Um, clearly accessible incidences of taking land, being advantaged, even with the food supply.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
European-based folk learned from indigenous people how to survive in this beautiful land of ours. Um, uh, People of a sliver of Europe of Latin descent erased, totally erased.
Mhm.
And as two black people, you get around to our folks, and obviously we've mentioned enslavement. But the point of the book is the oh so terrible thing that happened, and we wronged you, black people, does not begin and end with enslavement. It is carried forth through right up into this day.
Mhm.
With a sense of reverence, I want to make sure that our viewers are understanding the depth of your compassion for your people, for our people.
Mhm.
And you use the term descendants.
Right.
Why do you use the term descendants?
Okay, so descendants are the words. It's the it's an. Uh, I'm a little mentally tired today. Um, it's a term of affection for me. We have so many terms for Black people that are not terms of affection, right? But it's also a term to acknowledge this unbroken continuum from slavery, right? So descendants are the people trapped in high poverty neighborhoods, and anybody who descends from slavery. I'm a descendant, right? Even though I don't live in the hood. And my point is that it's an honorific to acknowledge, right? If you look at the residential caste was created as a response to the Great Migration, right? 6 million, more than 6 million Black people leave the South over 7 decades to escape Jim Crow, seek opportunity. The primary response to that in the North, Midwest, and West was to contain them in their own neighborhoods and then redline those neighborhoods and cut them off from uh, federal investment in mortgages and private investment as well, right? It marked the Black neighborhoods we were contained in, our ancestors were contained in, with a D, the lowest rating,
Who did that
as
marking so
hazardous,
people know?
right? As
Yeah.
hazardous, right? And so descendants, and I'm also in the book, every single chapter begins with a story of a single descendant. I'm also showing the beauty of our resistance, right? Our resilient, persistent resistance. Every single generation has resisted the oppressions brought down on us. you know, and I'm showing that, right? I'm showing my love. I'm showing that, you know, I'm also trying to frankly humanize Black people for all readers, right? The biggest challenge to dismantling anti-Black residential caste is to get everyone to see Black people, frankly, the way I do, the way I was taught to, right?
As human,
Black
fully
people
human.
as unbelievably capable, right? Capable of doing anything, creating, you know, something out of nothing, right? If we're just given a chance, right? That's kind of what I was raised in, right? You know, I was raised to love my people and myself, right? And so if you can see Black people as three-dimensional human beings worthy of the moniker citizen, right? Worthy of inclusion, capable of being a change agent, a transformative change agent for themselves and the communities they live in, right? So I'm doing that along the way of telling the story of residential caste. It's meant to be hopeful, right?
Yes.
Meant to show what can be and what should be.
The fullness of our humanity. We
Mm-hmm.
have ingenuity. We utilize resources. We
Mm-hmm.
breathe. We have families. But
Mm-hmm.
most importantly, we have agency and power.
Right.
And we have a place. We have a place just like anybody else. You make that abundantly clear.
Right.
To demonstrate that, and you've already alluded to it about legal and official political machinations, your book represents sort of a travel log. You look at Baltimore, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Chicago, New York, um, and even the West Coast. There are examples in
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
And you begin with Baltimore. And for us, I mean, Sankofa Video Books and Cafe is situated in Washington, D.C., across from Howard University. You're situated in the Washington neighborhood. I'm situated in the Washington neighborhood. For many different reasons, we have affinity for that but northernmost city, Baltimore, Charm City. You start with Baltimore, and two individuals in your profession. I'll look down and make sure I get the names correct. Ashby Hawkins and George Meccan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I'm
Do you
pronouncing.
have the page where they're with their picture? Let me see. I
Um,
can hold it up.
yeah,
Go
let's
ahead.
see if
Keep
the
talking.
camera will. Distinguished gentlemen as they are, but they were lawyers who were activists in their community.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're finding the picture, here's what I like to do. Yes, excellent. So you
Look
get
at
a
them. Look at them. And you
yeah,
see the guy in the bow tie is McMecken,
Matt
right?
Metcalf, yeah.
Right. And you
Who's
know,
and there's a Baltimore school named after him. I hope the
right.
students,
And the other guy
yeah.
is W. Ashby Hawkins, who uh was Thurgood Marshall before there was a Thurgood Marshall, right? He
So
what
let's
he said,
explain that.
huh?
What I like about this is they were indefatigable. They were persistent. They did not give up. So, if you would tell us about how they won legal battles,
Mm-hmm.
how
Mm-hmm.
powerful white folks in power were constantly attacking Black communities.
Right. So the effort. So first of all, Baltimore had the largest free Black population of I think almost any city during the era of slavery. Right. And in the 1890s, the turn of the century, Black people could live wherever they wanted. They could go in the stores, try on the clothes, right? It's only when I think as the Great Migration starts and you get more Black people. I wanted to try to bring the picture up again. And this guy, him, McMacken, right? He decides he's a lawyer, right? He decides he wants to buy a beautiful house on a street where a lot of rich white people live. You know, they just decide they can't have this anymore, right? And so Baltimore's the first place with racial zoning, and he and W. Ashby Hawkins fight it successfully, right? All the way in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court strikes down
Zoning
racial.
laws, right? Zoning
Huh?
laws was zoning laws the first line of attack.
Well, in Baltimore, they just tried to solve this problem. I quote this New York Times article. The mayor just basically says, the Negro needs to learn his place, right? And we can't have Black people moving in to invading white neighborhoods. So we're going to create racial zoning, right? Blocks have to be either majority white or majority Black, right? And so they won that. And then W. Ashby Hawkins, he successfully fought segregation in trains. He fought it in schools. This is all like in the 30s and 40s, right? Thurgood Marshall, it kind of learns about civil rights advocacy by watching this guy, right? And
So
he's
there's a lesson of
unknown hero.
There's a lesson of persistent legal engagement. In other words, have courage engaging in the system. He
Right.
demonstrates that.
Right. And then he also runs for the U.S. Senate. He's so sick of, I have direct quotes from this guy saying things that I used to hear my father say, saying things that I hear people say now. Like, Black people pay their taxes and we're not getting our fair share of resources for our schools. Our schools are ridiculously underfunded, right? This is wrong, right? And I'm going to move from just filing lawsuits. I'm going to run for the U.S. Senate, and he did this a long time ago. He had no illusions about winning. My father ran for governor against George Wallace, right? No illusions about winning, but he was basically in his stump speeches. He was also he wrote a lot of pieces for the Afro-American and was on the board. Basically, the point is, I feature these agitating Black people who created their own press, the Afro-American, and speak to their own people. And he would say in his speeches, show some race pride. This Republican Party, the party of Lincoln is taking our votes for granted. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, indeed.
So vote for me and I will make sure you get some racial equity, right? Now, he didn't win. But then I proceed each generation, you have, what's those brothers? Oh, I'm forgetting Clarence and I'm forgetting the names, but the guy, Clarence Mitchell, Clarence.
Yes.
Okay. I'm forgetting.
One was as Congressman Perrin
Mitchell.
Yes.
And his brother, I believe, Clarence, right? But
Clarence. And I'm getting them confused. It's
right. But
conspiring over.
Perrin Mitchell agreed to be a plaintiff to sue the University of Maryland to let him into the law school. The same law school that had kept
Thurgood Marshall
out. And Thurgood Marshall was his lawyer. But I show this each generation, from the 1900 to 2020. I show LDF suing on behalf to fight the rescinding of the red line.
Yes, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I just want to line things out for our viewers.
Right. A century of Black resistance to oppression and demanding equality and respect in the face of cumulative blunt force trauma to the Black neighborhoods in East-West Baltimore, known as the butterfly, from
the white butterfly. I'm sorry, the black butterfly, the white L.
Right.
I'm sorry.
But the neighborhoods of Red Line, then they have urban renewal, then they have a highway to nowhere, mowing down vital Black neighborhoods.
Sheryl, let me do a strategic reiteration then.
Right.
Here are some of the touch points in the great excitement of it all about Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
You get elected officials, so you get an official position, but then you get codification in legal oppression. It's met and fought by two very super intelligent, highly active individuals. But the point of it all that momentum that we live by as Black people comes out of the 19th century, right after the Civil War. You're talking the close of the 1800s going into the 1900s. And
Mhm.
all this cannot happen because of singular individuals. Black folk had community even when folks were trying to deny them the space and the right to live.
Right.
You talked about um, the support of the the Afro newspaper,
Hmm.
or these gentlemen had support of parents who were interested in their children's education.
Hmm.
Um, People knew their history. I mean, Frederick Douglass got a lot of his impulse and personal resources from being in Baltimore.
Right.
Uh, the NAACP, it's no accident, headquartered in Baltimore.
Right.
Why? Because they chose to center themselves in a place where Black people thrive. And once thriving, unfortunately, there's a great discomfort on the part of a white majority. And what I want to emphasize is, and we'll go further with this, obviously, is that it's not just legal matters or formal societal matters, but it's the, well, as sophisticated say, it's the quotidian, it's the daily experience. White folks reinforce what they want with violence,
Hmm.
and their elected leaders reinforce that violence. This is nothing new,
Right.
nothing new to us.
Right. And
And
I show that. I don't want to make it seem like there's only like these singular
people,
male resistors, right?
oh, your
But I
book
also
demonstrates very
feature
well. Let me interrupt. Your book
right,
demonstrates very well that they're tied into their communities, that they're accountable to one another. I just
right.
wanted to make that clear.
Right, and that and then the modern struggle, I show some of these transportation equity activists. It's not just lawyers and professionals who are down in there, and then there's also the people who were in the uprising after Freddie Gray died. Right, we get a century of resistance, but we still have a lot of intentional public policies. Even in this black-run city, um, Baltimore. I mean, there's a majority black representation on the city council. They've had black mayors for quite a while. A study found that Baltimore black neighborhoods how do I let's see white neighborhoods in Baltimore were getting 4 times the public investment as black neighborhoods. Now, I have to applaud the new young mayor, Brandon Scott. He's disrupting that, right? But now they're paying attention to. They have like an equity analysis. They're paying attention to, and they've created a racial equity fund to stop, over investing in white space and devaluing black spaces.
The point that we will get at before we leave
Hmm.
this discussion is we're not squawking and hooting and hollering just for our folks.
Right.
We're talking about a battle over the nature of society.
Hmm.
Everybody's going to lose if this keeps going. It's
Right.
sad because we're living in the midst of a pandemic, and my congratulations to you completing this book in the midst of that.
Hmm.
Remaining focused on it. Climate change is before us. Yeah, a few miles away from us, not too far. You could do a healthy walk to our nation's capital, and we still can't get social infrastructure that actually serves people, that actually helps families.
Right.
And these battles are heavily racialized.
Right.
It's, people can argue with us as the day is long, and there's no avoiding it. We have the historical receipts, we have the evidence, both present and past, and hopefully we decide for a better future.
Hmm.
I want to give you an opportunity for people, again, to get a more personal understanding. So, Baltimore remains unfinished. You know, we talked about the black butterfly. In other words, East and West Baltimore predominantly black. Everything else surrounding predominantly white. We've talked about the white L, where if you can bisect Baltimore and extend the bottom line out to the right. Again, race, racial marginalization, demarcation. But you quickly and slightly mentioned the federal projects. And again, I'm not getting the right federal agency correct, but it's HUD related. The Home Loan Corporation. I'm
Well,
leaving out a word there.
the federal government invented the 30-year mortgage.
Right. And there
Uh,
was a loan
it was
corporation.
Homeowners Lending Corporation,
Corporation. That's it.
right, which became basically FHA. You heard of
Okay.
FHA-backed
Yes.
loans, which are because the
The
federal
Federal
government
Housing
says,
Authority.
we will
Yeah.
insure this. If a person defaults, bank, and you're the lender, you'll get your money, right? Okay, so the interest rates tend to be lower, more favorable. A traditional 30-year mortgage, which didn't exist before, brings home ownership to the masses, right? Black people intentionally cut out of it.
Their neighborhoods are marked
and they
D for
require.
hazardous.
I'm sorry.
Their neighborhoods are marked D for hazardous.
And right,
Don't
right,
lend in those
right,
areas.
right. And also, they say the federal government basically instructs lenders. By the way, put a racially restrictive covenant. We're only going to lend in white areas, and we need racial homogeneity. So to maintain it, every deed has to have a racially restrictive
So
covenant.
you will not sell to a black person or a Jewish person.
No,
And
no, not at all.
if you do, we have given you the pretense to do extra legal things like raise a ruckus by being an elected leader. You can agitate other citizens. You can have newspapers of record. And we're not talking small newspapers. We're talking even New York Times, Atlanta Constitution Journal, Baltimore Sun. They all historically, from the 19th century onward, have the most despicable descriptions of alarm about black people living in their neighborhoods. I'm sorry,
Right.
Sheryl.
No, but it's true. And so beyond racially restricted covenants, it's straight up violence to,
Citizen committees come knock on your door. We advise you to move out by,
excrement on your front door, anything
firebombing.
Black people from invading the neighborhood. So federal policies from the 20s forward, right, 30s forward, right, play to the desires of black people and shape their willingness to live, right? So they make it worse. Like I said, 1900 black people basically live where they wanted to live, but they're the ones who teach white people, average white people, to be afraid of, both for financial reasons or other reasons, of having black people as your neighbors. Right.
So there's the big aha here.
I'm sorry?
There's the big aha here. What's being utilized politically and socially is, again, the ghetto, the hood.
Right.
There's a mythology that's, in other words, we're going to give you a myth. We're going to give you a grand story to live by, white folk. How did that all get started?
Okay, so everybody who's watching us will recognize words like law and order, welfare queen, thug, super predator, ghetto, right? All of
urban renewal. Let's toss that one in too.
No, but I'm saying, anti-black stereotypes, and I have a whole chapter about ghetto mythologizing, and the thing to understand when you say, now we have like CRT, right? All right, but
critical race theory,
the whipping up of hysteria about blackness has been central to American politics, for forever, but at least since the 60s, to justify systemic racial segregation, right? To justify, and the most vulgarly transparent participant in this was Donald Trump, running for re-election in 2020, right? He cast himself as the protector for white suburbanites. I will protect you. You can thank me for.
You want to have those city people moving in and spoiling your suburban dream.
Right.
Almost a virtual quote.
protecting you from crime and your property values going down. You could thank me very much, right? But he also, every time he referred to cities, particularly cities with a lot of Black representation, infested, right? I mean, he would get into, he would
Now, I
attack.
would like to add that his son-in-law
Mm-hmm.
owns apartments that are part of his accusation in Baltimore,
Right,
or
right,
or he mischaracterized John Lewis's district in Atlanta.
right,
I
right. Why
mean,
don't
those
you
are
go back to
two.
your infested, crime infested, right? And so here's
Mhm.
the point, though. This anti-Black rhetoric for 50 years had perfected um, sort of an anti-tax, anti-government fanaticism, right?
Because they're
He,
taking your money and they're taking advantage of you. In the meantime, your point is, pardon the expression, our money's being taken, developing cities as we're getting pushed out.
right. My point is that, so we have a rhetoric that's the exact opposite of what we actually do. The rhetoric is government gives handouts, particularly to Black people, right? But what we actually do is we overinvest in, and we give a lot of handouts. We can't even tax billionaires. Billionaires, we just this week, right? Billionaires don't pay anywhere near their fair share, right? But the mythology is that the big bad government is just for those people, and we can't have a fair tax system. We can't have my pray that Biden gets some version of this package, right? And I argue in the final chapter, Abolition and Repair, that historically defunded Black neighborhoods deserve to be in the front of the line for any new
Did we say
physical
it?
or social infrastructure,
Yeah,
right?
prioritized.
Prioritize,
Yes.
right, right, and we'll see how that goes, but yeah.
Well, there's a lot in between, and we can still uncover
Mm-hmm.
some of the reveal of your book. Thank you. Um, so we talked about Ronald Reagan's use, or the book talks about rather, use of the welfare queen and the mischaracterizations. Factually, it's untrue. Like allegedly taking $150,000 between the federal and city governments, and the woman in question is one person who possibly did worse crimes, by the way, but because the political purpose was to agitate a white majority, Lee Atwater directed his candidate to a success based on racism, and it's
Right.
been used ever since. Importantly, though, your book points out that it's not a villain behind a curtain wringing his hands. It's very rarely her, but some women are joining that crowd, unfortunately. Um, but it's political leadership. Let me get more focus for our viewers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's allegedly liberals or centerists also that utilize this. You describe one former senator of Maryland who made sure that money went to her neighborhoods and not to black folk, and yet her public profile is not one of antagonism to black people.
You're
You've
talking
got
about Senator Barbara Mikulski,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Who,
and
mm-hmm.
and the cover of that though is a status quo of business as usual. I'm a woman of the people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking care of my people. And so no one says, hey, wait a minute. Let's look at the present big picture and the historical big picture. We're not against your people, but you need to serve everybody and be accountable to that.
Right. So,
We've got a present governor who's nice and crunchy, who's had, stories of personal heroism, but there's a failure on the part of my sector, my stakeholders, the media, to really talk about really direct actions over and against black folk, particularly in the city of Baltimore. I'm
right,
sorry, we keep returning to Baltimore. I promise the viewers that we'll talk more broadly.
right. So I'm an equal opportunity. I just show both Democrats and Republicans using rhetoric and actions to disinvest in Blackness
Dog
And
whistles, code
but
speak.
I'll tell you, the one
Yeah.
place government overinvests is in the technologies of surveillance of blackness, in law enforcement, in like 311 calls, right? The policing of black bodies, particularly in high poverty black neighborhoods, but policing of black bodies, frankly, everywhere, right? And I show, like, for example, Chicago, every 4 years, the state spends almost $1 billion to incarcerate people on, the inner city high poverty blocks of that city, right? And my whole point is that if we could break through this dogma, right, and change the lens in which we see black people, from punitive to caring, from thug to citizen, once you sort of pick up a different lens, suddenly it frees you up to pursue evidence-based strategies that cost a lot less and um, uh, help people, right? So, show Richmond, California, they solved their gun violence problem with a 18-month Peacemaker Fellowship that wrapped the kids most likely to engage in thuggish behavior. It's like 24 young black males, the most likely to engage in black and brown males in so-called thuggish behavior. 24/7 love, an assigned mentor, right? What do you need? What do you need to transform your life? You need a driver's license. You need to get out of here. You need to travel. You need training. You need some cognitive behavioral therapy. What do you need? And they engage with them that way, right?
And again, the basis of that was love and respect. It wasn't
Love and respect. And that
it's not you are a problem that we must eliminate. And by the way, if we're going to talk about utilitarian moments, in the book you demonstrate. Am I exaggerating? I thought it was $500 million for, maybe that's all of California, but Richmond saved millions of dollars because people listened to each other. The law enforcement that was willing to deal with this project that you're describing said, look, there are like about 28 guys who really do these killings. It's not a whole neighborhood. It's not a swatch of the city. It's specific individuals. Then you talk about, forgive me, I'm forgetting his name, saying,
Jerome Boggin,
yes,
another descendant who I opened the chapter with, right? The child of great migrants from Michigan.
And like your family, he says, I must respect the people who look like me and who live around me. Let me engage them. And he had the educational and career skills to convince the city of Richmond to undertake his project.
Right. And the gun, they seeded it with about $1 million, $1 million. And in a couple of years, gun violence dropped by 55%. Right. And he had developed youth development programs. So he saw these kids, he saw himself in this. He said he almost had that kind of life, but a mentor saved him. Right. And he saw himself in there. My lipstick spreading. And, so they wrapped them in love. And for a fraction of the cost of mass incarceration, dramatically changed the violence, dramatically reduced it. And what he said is, they're the most powerful change agents. And if we can get them to change their behavior, all the other guys around them will start to change their behavior. Right. So you get a virtuous cycle of repair.
Yes,
right?
A calling in instead of a locking out.
Right.
I think that's what's clear in your narrative.
Right. And so I use that as the beginning of this chapter on abolition and repair. So this is what transformation looks like. Right. And the nature of the relationship of the city with disadvantaged, struggling kids and the neighborhoods they lived in changed. Right. And so I offer other examples like, universal basic income pilots. That's becoming popular with, about 24 progressive cities are trying it. It's a miraculous what $500 a month can do for a poor person. It's like, I get an extra $500 a month with no conditions attached, right? Surprise, surprise, right? It begins to have, that people eat better food, that, they
They're
get on
able to
a better
commute.
trajectory.
They're able to commute to work that they want to do because they don't have to take a bus ride for a 15-minute trip that lasts an hour.
Right.
And but there's a big slamming of the brakes here, Sheryl. Let me forewarn you.
Okay.
If our society is embedded in American residential caste, energized with great power through racism and inculcation, a feeding, a stoking of racial animosity, the way to advancement is not an impossible one, but indeed a difficult one. You talked about universal basic income. If we summon the California example, there's a housing shortage that's making our neighbors unhoused. And yet, people are finding if you make a direct investment into people, there's a positive result, not just for that individual or that group, but for everyone. So I just want to quicken things up just a tad. We talk about caste as kind of a permanent marker of class. We're talking about space, the residential, in the sense of a physical separation. But even under the guise of integration, we are now living in America that cities are worse, pardon the clumsiness here, worsely segregated than they were
More
in 19,
segregated.
more segregated and, than they were in the 1970s. In fact, by some measures, 3 times as much. And there's really no advancement without understanding that each person has their identity and they deserve their honorifics, each group as such. But there's no advancement without mutuality, respect, responsibility, accountability to one another. You have used this term that I'm about to launch in your previous books about the lovings and about integration. It requires a cultural dexterity of us all, but particularly those who deem themselves the majority culture. What's this cultural dexterity that we're to summon?
Okay, so a culturally dexterous white person accepts the loss of centrality of whiteness in this country, in politics and demographics and culture. Accepts it, if not celebrates it, right? Basically it's the attitude if you come to the PTA meeting and you realize, okay, I'm one voice among many. I don't necessarily get to call it how it's going to be in every situation.
And somebody's other children is just as important as mine.
Right. But I'm willing to be part of the multiracial coalition that supports policies that bring not just my own children along, but all children along, right? That's a culturally dexterous white person, right? I think Biden has accumulated some over the years, the guy who was one of the chief authors of that terrible crime 1994 crime bill, he centered racial equity in his presidential campaign, right? And
I guess the big drama is
brutal reality is Black people are not a political majority in many places, right? You got to have allies, and you got to get to a majority among the policy making bodies, whether it's the city council, the school board, the zoning board, the civilian review board, whatever. But I do say that Black people have more allies than they've ever had in the history of this country, right? And 20 million people rose up in the summer of 2020, rose up signs saying Black Lives Matter, right? And that's not a small thing. You need to harness that openness. And, you get people to vote for you. You're running, like you're a young Brandon Scott saying, I'm the new generation. I'm going to run for city council. And then, damn it, I'm running for mayor. And he won, right? And his policies are transformative. I mean, they are so different than what has been, right? So my point is, you never get to stop fighting for the country you want or deserve. If you get anything from my book, I show generations of descendants, right, fighting battles. But I think we have reached the tipping point when a critical mass of white people accepts diversity, wants it to work, and wants to be part of the multiracial the functional multiracial politics that pursues racial equity and fairness, right? That wants something better than this savagely separate and unequal country that we have. But we still have structural barriers of supremacy to overcome. The Electoral College, the filibuster. You read the history of some of these gerrymandering, massive efforts to suppress non-white voters, right? But either you keep fighting and gathering power and organizing and running for office and going for the policies you support, or you're going to get more of the same. And I do hold up hopeful examples. The places I'm most energized about where we can actually accomplish something right now is in progressive Democratic Party led cities. Cities that are doing things like making bus routes free from the poorest neighborhoods. Right?
They're done for rich neighborhoods. Why not the neighborhoods that really need them?
Just like, let's try something different, right? So, the beauty, once you understand residential caste, and the 3 anti-Black processes that undergird it: boundary maintenance, opportunity hoarding, and
surveillance.
Anti-Black surveillance.
Yes.
Then the way forward is clear. You just have to disrupt and dismantle, do the opposite, right?
So
green line rather than red line.
Let me catch something for you as we're doing the wind up in our final innings here.
Yes.
Abolition just doesn't mean destruction and throwing out stuff. There's an obligation, there's a commitment to rebuild.
Right.
Most abolitionists were about that, historically and in the present.
Right.
Even when they're cast, pardon the pun, as wild, unusual, radical, destructive people, if you listen carefully, as your book, White Space, Black Hood, demands, and it's very compelling, there's a sense of operating from something that's of substance, something that's deeper, that has the elements of the requirement to be consistently committed, to be respectful, to be mutual. And you point to historical things. I'm just going to do 3 since I promised to give you the last word. Our beloved Richard Wright talked about the uniqueness that Black people have a unique love for one another, that we must act on that love. You talk about even W.E.B. Du Bois. When he did his study of Philadelphia, it wasn't ivory tower looking down condescension. And by the way, for us Black folk, when we engage in these debates, there are all sorts of traps. When we talk about the underclass, we have to qualify it. We have to make judgments about when to speak, when to engage. Is it worthwhile, this particular battle? Are we going to gain an ally or not? All that is revealed in your book. And then you talk about bell hooks also. And especially with her, if you're going to talk about a love for Black folk in an engagement and having significant relationships and presence in the world, you have drawn upon her and all these other people in a particular way. There's an ethic of love. And that may be a good place to operate, because you as a writer, and I know you well enough, you want to leave people with something empowering.
Right. And I do. Yeah. Thank you I invoke all those folks. And in fact, I invoke Black writers and thinkers throughout the book, right? Who've been at the center of the struggle for imagination of what should be and can be, right? But yeah, the last chapter, I lead with love. I particularly raise up bell hooks in that, first and most important love is self-love, right? You don't sit around waiting for anybody else to value you and your people first. But I do try to engage with non-Black readers. And I actually have quite a few. They find me on Twitter and they're appreciative of what I'm saying. I said, it's not enough for you to just raise a sign and say Black Lives Matter. You need to be part of the coalition that does something different. And if you lead with an ethic of love, you're going to free yourself from all this awful supremacy, which bell hooks says, a society premised on white supremacy is necessarily one based on violence, right? It's not sustainable, but it also does a lot of damage to individuals. So it's about this ethic of love. It may seem Pollyannish, but she says it's the only way forward, right? So just holding that up and showing policies how different it looks to have a policy that comes from an ethic of, it's agape love, like equal citizenship. It's not necessarily going and hugging somebody, but really getting in your head that beautiful brown and Black children are just as worthy as your child, right? Deserve just as much as your child, maybe even more.
Yeah, and being willing to live by that. That's I hate to be a brute about it, but I think those are kind words. You must be willing to live by that. It can't be a flash in the pan. It can't be a political cycle. Please don't depend upon most media to, as far as solid guidance. I'm going to unabashedly say turn to Sheryll Cashin's book, White Space, Black Hood. Turn to her other books about fundamental realities that you can know. You have to work. I know you have to take care of your families. I know you have to have downtime, viewers, but it is worth an engagement of empowerment to look at history, to look at narrative, to understand our own voice, to understand our own agency. All that's affirmed in your work, Sheryll. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that was wonderful. So we've come to the Q&A portion of this event. So please, 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 we have Professor Cashin and Dr. Whettstone waiting in the wings. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate while you have them here. This is a wonderful opportunity. Don't hesitate to ask your questions and post your comments here. So I'm going to bring them on and we're going to post the questions that we have right now over the screen for Professor Cashin to address or Mr. Whettstone to address. Here we go. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here again.
Yeah, again. Okay, so I'm going to go away and then I'm going to have the questions. Here we go.
Should I pick that one up? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think that Mr. Whettstone, I think your mic is
okay. Let me pick that up. Dizzy asked, "Do you think abolition of these state-sanctioned processes will come through voting?" We have to. Yes, right. If you don't vote and get to majority power among the the institution that gets to make the decisions, you can't abolish. So absolutely yes, you have to vote and go to the polls. Okay, why should we wait to be prioritized? We have to fight to be prioritized, right? What behavior should we be engaging in as descendants? I can't speak for everybody, right? But we have to register to vote. If you don't like the policies that are being foisted on you, maybe you should be running for office, right? But we should be supporting candidates that have the right policies, and we should be gathering power. You know, apart from politics, though, find out who in your community is doing what you think is necessary and vital work and support it, right? If you have money, support them, particularly Black-led efforts, right? That are responsive to the authentic, leadership and demands that our communities need. Oh, thank you. Carl Nelson was awesome, wasn't he? Thank you, Ward 8 Jerry. Appreciate that shout out. Power of mentorship. We all need mentors.
So I'm going to step in here. I think Mr. Whettstone is still having issues with his microphone. Let's try one more time. I'm sorry, we can't hear that wonderful voice. Okay, I think he's going to go off and come back on. But while we wait for Mr. Whettstone to come back, Professor Cashin, was there anything you wanted to make sure that you gave to the audience, any piece of advice?
No, I just want to express my love for all of you for taking the time to listen. Obviously I want you to buy and read my book, and if you like it, tell the world about it and encourage others to. But, I just want to send my love to you and say, I love you and you should love yourself. And, I end the book saying this, like, whatever else non-descendants say or think about us, we owe it to ourselves to lift up those of our brothers and sisters that are not doing well, that are not being loved by society, and find ways to do that, if with your time or treasure, however you can.
I see the comment from Dizzy Bird. Mariama Meyer says, right on.
Thank you, Mariama. Right on to you, sister.
So I see the comment from Dizzy Bird about mentorship. What is something that we can do every day? I hear you just mentioned philanthropy, but what's something that we can do as descendants of Black people every day to uplift and help our narrative?
Well, so, I'm a big believer in gathering collective power, right? Individuals get tired, and individuals by themselves can't dismantle systems that are set against you. So, and there's also just a lot of joy in locking arms with other people and working with others. So, people are busy and they got to get food on the table, and get their studies done or get to work or whatever. But having at least one organization in your life in which you are giving time or money, you may have little of it, or you may not have both, but I've been on the Poverty and Race Research Action Council, which is a civil rights organization. I've been on that board for almost 20 years and I stay on it. I got off a lot of other boards that really weren't about uplifting my people, right? And I write books and I speak and I advocate. That's my service, right? I can't speak to others, but I think having at least one organization where you are working with others to address something you care about that's meaningful for your community. I think it also just brings so much value and purpose to your life, right? You get something out of it. And if you're just isolated, I mean, I believe in mentorship. I seriously do. But and I have been mentors, and I am meant, believe me, I got mentees. I got lots of them, right? But and I mentored a young high school student when I was young, right?
but we can't mentor our way out of this, right? We need collective action where people are really hard charging at the systems that are sent against us. And so I encourage you to find ways to be engaged in that while you're mentoring people.
Okay, can you talk more about what your board does and the advancements that have come from being on that board?
Okay, so the Poverty and Race Research Action Council, their main goal is to marry the work of people like me, academics who who spend years researching things, you know, to think about why things are the way they are and what could make it better, and to connect that kind of knowledge with people on the ground who are trying to make communities better, right? To be honest, I think I get more out of it than I give to it, right? But they also are doing a lot behind the scenes with trying to be sure that the Biden administration has the right policies and is following through on its rhetoric. So it's a lesser known civil rights organization, right? I also give money to the big ones, you know. So, you know, if you're interested, you can go to the PRAC website, Poverty and Race Research Action Council, to find out more about it.
Wonderful. Okay, guys, so you heard where you can go to get on the board and to help your community. What lasting effects do you hope that your book will have for the person who reads it?
Well, what I hope most is that people will understand the truth. My only mission in life, really, as a writer, is to just tell the truth, right? And you will understand, whatever color you are, the truth of a century of Black suppression, born, you know, residential caste, why it was created, how it persists, right? How intentional it is. And what you do with that knowledge is up to you. But I guarantee you will understand a lot better why things are the way they are, and you know, and be clear about that. I also want to make it clear it's not hopeless, right? So I do hold up examples of communities that are doing better. I mean, at least trying to transform, right?
Excellent. Okay, I don't want to hold you too long. We are at the 8:15 mark right now. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your work and writing this book, White Space, Black Hood, which can be purchased at Sankofa. And also thank you to Mr. Whettstone. I'm so sorry about your audio, but thank you for being here. It's nice to see your face. And I'll give you the last word, Professor Cashin.
Just thank you. Thank you to Sankofa. I hope everybody will support this wonderful Black-owned community institution.
All right now. Yes. Thank you. Thank you again.
Happy
Thank you so
Friday.
much for being here. Happy Friday, everybody. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. And come by and see us and tell people about this event. Share it with a friend, you know, follow us on social media. Again, everyone have a great night and we'll see you in the next one.
Good night.